All right, we're live. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the TST meeting. Today, there are two discussion topics. One of them is hopefully very, very short, and that is a proposal to move towards Kanban style tracking of tasks within a release. What we're doing today is we have a bookend release planning and release review meetings at the start and end of each release, where we decide on major features and major objectives or theme for the release, and then we sort of leave it in the middle. We leave it up to individual teams to run how they want to run. Generally, we were planning kind of synchronized sprints, where we invited the leaders of various brigades and teams to plan the sprint along with everybody else. But we've been seeing a severe kind of downturn in participation or activity on that front. And this is largely due to kind of a mismatch between what the sprint process aims to do and between how the various teams need to operate, either because of the nature of the team, distributed nature of the team, or some other driving objectives. Like, for example, I know the P4 team was largely driven by the pacing required by getting to a specific demo, and so the sprint boundaries were rather arbitrary, shall we say. And similarly for the ODTM team, and really fundamentally also for the dynamic configuration team too. Also, the GUI brigade is now largely shrunk down to just one person, and the work there, and similarly for internationally, the localization, the line brigade, the work there is somewhat progressing on just best effort basis, more in a laissez-faire manner. And again, the sprint boundaries are completely arbitrary. So we were getting basically very little benefit from the sprint cadence process. Any of the sprint velocity points that we were accruing were largely meaningless because the basis of the Scrum teams is kind of mutable, or it's very, very small, and we're not getting any predictive power based on that, nor we can actually impose some sort of a projected velocity because people contribute in addition to having other obligations. Anyway, long story short, I don't think the sprint process was working well, and so I'm suggesting that we instead use Jira Kanban board instead of this sprint. It's very similar in a sense that there is still a swing board where we can create tasks that you put in to-do lane, which is the leftmost lane. In the middle, you have the in-progress lane as people pick up work and start doing it.
Do you want to show the dynamic?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do this.
I thought Jira had this capability as well, so I guess my question is.
I'm not advocating that we depart from Jira. We still continue to use Jira. We just use it differently. That's the whole point. So this is an example of the Kanban board used by the ODTM team already. All right, so it looks very similar to the sprint tracking board. It's just that you have this. It's more of a continuous process. As we think of work to be done, of tasks to be done, they get injected into the to-do lane. As the work gets picked up, it gets dragged onto the in-progress lane, and as the work finishes, it gets dragged into done lane. There's no differentiation between closed and resolved. It's just to-do, in progress, and done. And it's actually very similar to what the team was doing informally on a window, on those 3 window panes with the sticky notes, right? Yep. Except this is electronic and it's clearly more conducive for collaboration by remote teams. And so, yes, the proposal is not to abandon using Jira, not at all. It's just to change the way we use Jira.
How is this different than, I guess, the 3 lanes that are the 3-lane view I've seen in Jira, where I guess the only difference the to-do list is what items have been assigned in the sprint, and they're still in progress.
Sure. So let's say if you were to, so this is an example of a Kanban for the ODTM team. There's also a dynamic config, and the Tools Brigade has their own Kanban board, right? This is that. Versus if you were to compare it to the ONOS Scrum board with its lanes, it's not almost any different, right? It's you have to do in progress done, except this work is now segmented by who's doing what who's is assigned to, and it happens on sprint boundaries. It's measured and created on sprint boundaries. And it's those sprint boundaries that are somewhat arbitrary. So what I'm basically suggesting is that we just kind of do each team does the planning of the work on their own pace and tracks their work. We still have visibility to it, but it's just that this synchronized planning on a regular cadence of sprints is no longer being done because we're not anymore.
So each project essentially now sets its own sprint boundaries?
Effective. There's no boundaries.
If it even wants to.
If it wants to, yes.
So what we are pushing for though is that each project specifies a set of milestones for the release. So within those milestones, we're going to say, okay, this is what I want to either demo or have done as part of this milestone.
Yeah.
And so then they'll come to the TST and present what they have at their milestones. And so it's very project driven.
Exactly.
How is progress towards that milestone tracked in the dashboard? Or
Excellent question, right? So yeah, so the whole point of the milestone is to avoid having a large bucket of work that kind of goes untracked until sort of reconciliation at the end of the time period, which then you may be greeted by surprises, right? So the idea is to kind of segment that big bucket of work into a couple of buckets, which is what kind of the sprints were doing before. But instead of forcing a periodic cadence on everybody else and synchronized planning on everybody else, which is what we're having difficulty with, we just let them identify some points at which they expect cohesion in the project. For example, for the P4 brigade, it was demonstration of the certain support for P4 packet processing gateway or sort of subscriber packet gateway, and then they demonstrated that. So the idea here is that where would these demonstrations happen, right? Normally, in theory, you're supposed to do these demos at the end of each sprint. But the thought was to instead use these TST meetings to, whenever the team is ready, they can demonstrate accomplishing that mini milestone. It is basically kind of a step towards achieving the ultimate milestone at the end of the release.
So Thomas, I have a couple of questions. I'm sorry. Once you're done, maybe I can ask my
Well,
question.
I was just asking David whether that answered my question.
well, I guess it kind of. I mean, yeah, you have milestones. I guess I'm looking for on one of these dashboards how I tell if they're near a milestone or how many items are left or how much work until how can I look at a project and say I know they promised a milestone on this milestone, maybe milestone on a date, but I have no way to say, are they near it, I guess.
So the idea is, this is what Diana was alluding to. During the release planning, we would ask each team to identify at least two or potentially three milestones, points at which they would demonstrate their progress towards the release goals.
So they're not really tracked on the dashboard then, it's just
They're not. I mean, we might track them on dashboard. We haven't really we're not proposing that specifically. We just ask them to identify it, and then we will, around that time of the milestone, we would schedule a review meeting, and then we would use one of these TST meetings to run through those demos.
Okay.
And if we need to schedule an off-schedule TST meeting, then we can do that. But basically, the whole idea is to use the TST forum to kind of keep an eye on it.
Okay.
Did I miss something here? Yeah.
Thomas,
Yeah.
I have a couple questions. Can you please go back to the Kanban board, please?
Yes.
Just wanted to clarify a couple things here. So as we understand, so sprints are time-based. So are we saying that Kanban will not be time-bound? I mean, in particular to taking a couple of stories as an example, right?
Yeah, so the Kanban board is just there. Kind of think of it as the window pane outside of Guru's office, right? It's just there. And then when we think of piece of work to do, we just write a piece of work on a sticky note and we post it on the leftmost to-do window pane. That's basically what it is. And as work moves, we drag it across the swim lanes, and then when we're ready to clean up some of the work, let's say at the end of the release, we would scrub the work that's finished.
How is it to do?
Okay, so I'm sorry. So how do we show the priorities in the to-do list? Is there a way to prioritize them?
Yes, so I honestly don't know much about the tool, so I don't know whether there is a prioritization scheme to this or not.
Okay, because I was just thinking, like, let's say if we want to plan for dependencies, how do we show it, and how do we track them? Because let's say if there are a couple bugs identified as in the beginning of the release, so right now we are planning we do a bug scrub, and then we say that, let's say for this bug to be fixed in sprint 4 as an example, then I have 2 more sprints to regress it and then test it further before we can close the close the bug. So how do you think we can plan in using the Kanban board? Can we do a prioritization and then show these dependencies?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the tool to say how that's used. My guess is that we should be able to use the severity or the what do you call it, the priority of the item to order things in that order. At least in terms of just a linear ranking of the items in the work in the order in which we expect them or want them to be done. But for tracking dependencies and stuff like that, I have no idea how this is. I think this may not be intended for that.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, and I'm sorry, I have a couple other questions. So in the Kanban board, probably we should be able to categorize it based on some kind of epic. As an example, let's say QA has some task items, and then can we group them together into one category?
Within the same board?
Yes, yes. Is there
Again, I do not know whether there is a way to segment it or not.
Okay.
So my thought was that what we would do is create a couple of boards. So there would, for example, be a board for the platform team, which would include ISSU and the general core ONOS stuff. Then we probably have one for UI to keep track of the work on UI and localization. Potentially, maybe even combine those two into one. And then if people wanted to create their own other kind of Kanban boards, then we could create others. Whether or not you want to have a separate one for QA, for test tools and things like that, we can certainly do that. But I would think that the defects themselves, let's say the defects against the ONOS platform, would be kept under the platform board rather than under the QA board, right?
Yeah, true. That makes sense. So if let's say if we have our own QA board as an example, but I was just wondering how we can plan for the dependencies. I think that's the only item I was worried. Like,
unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I'm not that familiar with the tool.
Sure, no problem.
I'm sorry, what was that, Jordan?
Yuta said Kanban board can be ordered by rank and ticket can be declared blocked by others, but there's no way to visualize the dependencies. So, I mean, I guess you can create relationships between the tickets and prioritize them.
Oh yeah, sorry, I did. Thank you. I didn't see Yuta's message until now. So, okay, there's your answer right there.
Okay, that sounds good then. Yeah, as long as we can track them, I think that's good. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Here, let me, 1 second,
You can probably set up a rule in Jira that says something like it gives you a warning or blocks moving something in progress that has a dependency that's in a certain state.
I'm just moving this so that other people can see the chat here as well, so that I don't miss it. Okay. All right. Is there other questions on this? Or
one last question. Yes, one last question. So so what about the backlog? So the backlog is still as part of the main Jira board, and then we drag the stories as part of each project. into the to-do list?
Again, I was assuming that you just create them on the board itself. Maybe Utah can clarify whether or not you can create them in backlog and then drag them onto the board.
Can you click on an issue and you can see how it's?
I think the backlog is equivalent to the to-do.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah, okay.
I'm clicking on it here.
But the thing is, not all of them show up there, right? So
Yes.
how is it associated with? How is an issue?
So if I were to look at ONOS, let's say this one right here, right?
Yeah.
If I were to look at it from here, it's a custom registrator for OpenConfig, but I think it appears. Was it 7588? If I were to look at it on a board itself, 7588. I don't know if it exists.
So it's under Epic. It can be associated to
If I were to look at the backlog right here, 7588. Yeah, there. That's it. Yeah, I think it's a.
So issues can get pulled into a board somehow, and they can also still be part of a sprint.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think at least some experimentation
Is
with this
Utah
tool.
on the?
Yeah,
Maybe
you
you can help us understand.
Yeah, Utah, can you clarify?
What dynamic?
Yeah, so I mean, in a Kanban board is not really a different set of tickets. It's just visualization of existing ticket in different forms. So if it's ONOS numbered ticket, it still comes from the same pool. So in the ODTN case, it's doing a filter against all the ticket which is labeled ODTN and show it in this layout. That's pretty much what's happening here. So
Excellent.
Oh, okay.
How are they labeled?
So-
Is it by Epic or what's the filter look like?
So the Jira label text ODTN.
Oh, okay, I see. Got it. So you basically create a filter that pulls issues into the board, and you chose to use label as that.
Yes, yes, yes. And for the dynamic config one, we're using the dynamic config Epic. So that filtering condition can be flexible. I mean, it could be like if the ticket has a text bug, that's probably possible one way of building Kanban board, which probably doesn't make sense, but still possible.
Yeah, I mean, we use the bug scrub label, so we can still use
Oh, yeah.
pretty much the same for bug scrub.
Okay, it seems like any Jira query filter can be used to create a
So it
board.
makes it very flexible.
Okay. Sounds good.
So unless there are any objections, the idea is to start doing this with the O release, which means we would finish this release on the existing way of doing things. Hopefully, this is the last sprint, right?
And boards are constrained to a specific project.
Great. I think that's fine enough. Good enough.
So do we still do
Oh,
planning and review in the middle of the release?
You can.
I mean, is it for each team to do?
I think it's for each team to do their own.
Okay.
Yeah, that's so kind of the idea is to get away from that, because we were not doing demos. We were just getting together basically to look at the reviews that everybody dragged into their own sprint bucket, nodded heads, went our own ways, and then the end we discussed what would happen, but we're not doing any actual demos. And so the value of that exercise, I mean, there was some, clearly, I don't want to discount it, but I think this will work better. And maybe if we focus on actually demonstrating functionality at whatever milestones the team decides, that will have more value, I think.
So we'll still do a release planning. I've got it scheduled for Wednesday the 18th from 3:30 to 5 p.m. I'll send out a new template for the release planning where highlight your deliverables for Nightingale, but the intent for O would be list what you're planning to do, but also the milestones, the mini milestones that the project team is going to be delivering to or demoing to. And then part of each project team would be to schedule time with the TS2 to review it.
Yep, great. And speaking about the O release, would like to encourage everybody to vote on the release name. I just posted the poll for voting. All right.
You can actually have multiple projects in a single board, actually. So it can pull from all the issues in Jira. So you could have like a court issue and an ONOS issue that
Together.
Yeah.
On the scene. It's basically just
actually, I take it back because court is on a different Jira. But
okay. Yeah.
But you could have a defect thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I think unless there's any other comments, reservations, or questions, you can probably move off this topic and move on to the next one, which is a bit different. Going once, twice. All right. So now let's talk about the other topic, which is kind of scalability related topic, and specifically how to display large volumes of information on a CLI as well as UI. Presently, we have commands that lets us list number of the devices, links, hosts, and things like that. With devices, I don't expect that many issues or links, but with hosts, for example, we could definitely start to see problems if we have, let's say 20,000 hosts in the system. And especially I'm concerned about things like flows or routes. There could be hundreds of thousands of routes, and with flows, you could have, over a million or millions of flows in the system. And clearly, getting one long output, all of the details of all the flows, which is what would happen after some time if you were to type in flows on a CLI. Clearly, we would like to figure out a way you can ask for information in more digestible chunks. And similar for UI views, right? When you list flows, currently the UI handlers on the server side cook up all of the content and send it as either a single message or a series of messages over WebSockets. Whether or not somebody's going to be looking at the next page of output, it's still going to, that work is still going to happen. Now, in anticipation of this, a lot of the Java APIs that return potentially large volumes of information are structured to be returning iterable result, which means you can iterate as far as you want and no further. So on the Java API side, I think we're equipped to deal with it, but it's just a lot of the code that deals with the CLI handling and GUI handling is not. Now, on the UI side, I think there we have more control over what we do because we can simply just modify our handlers and return only chunks of information if the user page is down. So I'm not too worried about that. On the CLI side, it's a little bit more difficult because there we're at the mercy of the Karaf command mechanism, which currently the one command works as a single block. I don't know at least a way of.
So a couple questions. With the Karaf CLI, can you pipe it through less or more for paging?
Yes, but that's client side.
Okay.
That happens only outside of the command. You will have done the work of acquiring all of the information, formatting, and sending it in, but it's just going to get displayed to the user in chunks, which is fine for consumability by the user, but it's still unnecessary load on the system.
That makes sense. Then the question comes, are you talking about introducing the concept of cursors, much like database cursors, or are you planning to do this more like, I'll call it like a Google search, where you kind of give a starting number and a count, but because things might be changing behind the scenes, you're not guaranteed one consistent set?
Yeah, so we effectively already have the notion of the cursor. That's what iterable gives us, right? Iterable is something that we can iterate over. That's effectively a cursor. But what we don't have is the CLI handlers themselves just fully slurred. When they see an iterable, they will just iterate over it.
All right, but a cursor implies that someone is keeping essentially a snapshot of the data when you make the request, or enough something around it, so that if the data changes behind the scenes, nothing happens. So doesn't that mean for some of these iterators, you're essentially going to have on the server side now everything in memory, even though if it's not to the client?
Yeah, that's basically snapshot isolation. I don't think that's something that we need for this. We just need we need the iterators to lazily load the data. So like in the flow rule store, once you iterate past 100, it makes another call to another node to get to the next
Right.
one.
So that says if I get the first 10 and then I do a query for the second 10, I might actually get some of the first 10 if the sort order is changed in some sense,
Right.
or if things are inserted at the top, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I don't see why we would need to worry about tackling a major consistency issue in this case.
Okay, I mean, that's fine. I'm just kind of clarifying to understand what's going on. It's more like how Google does paging into large data sets, where if the data set changes, tough, for the most part, it doesn't matter because you wanted something in the first 10 anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So so I understand, I acknowledge that that's definitely a kind of a concern that we'll need to deal with, but my primary, to me, it's a secondary one. The concern, my primary concern is how to modify the usage of the CLI or the structure of the CLI to be able to accomplish this. As I said, for UI, I'm not worried about it too much, but for CLI, I just simply don't know of a mechanism that would easily adapt within Carafe.
Well, so Carafe,
to deal with that.
The way commands are invoked is that you have your initial set of arguments that you provide when you invoke the command. And then effectively within the execute block, you have system.in and system.out.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could effectively print whatever you want in system out.
Mm-hmm.
And then while the user, you could say as simple as like N, P, and Q, right? Like if a user hits N, you load the next set of things and rewrite standard out, or just write more to it. If they P, you go backwards, and if they hit Q, then it terminates the connection. So you can leave one of these command instances open for an arbitrary amount of time. Obviously, it can be interrupted if you lose the SSH session.
Okay,
But
I was not aware of that. That's actually a possibility, but if you can, then that would be, we could probably provide a base command that other commands could be refactored on top of.
Page command or something
command, exactly.
that listens to standard in and will make a call to
Basically,
get more data.
4 commands less, right?
Yeah, get more data.
Kind of built in. It's less on the inside than on the outside.
But internally, we're going to need the same mechanics for CLI and GUI views. We'll need, like David was saying, an ability to actually have a consistent, stable view on the data that's backing it. Because if you're just going to index in, then you need to make sure that
yeah. How does the iterator internally know where it's up to, right? Like how would you implement this? Like you say you return an iterator and you just start reading values off of that.
Yeah, so to me that's a secondary one. So iterator is what is the notion that basically it's what maintains the state, supposed to maintain the state, and it gives control over the pace of consumption to the client.
Yeah.
The implementation, what the implementation is another story, right? And this is what Jordan was referring to. This is where we can do or do not do some snapshot isolation. For some results, we could simply say, you get what you get. You may get some repeated results, or you may get some missing results. That's fine. For certain things, we want to actually pay the cost of having, fully consistent snapshot isolation. But it can still be cheaper without paying all of the overhead of encoding and shipping it all at one go. But I think that's a separate problem. I'm less concerned with that one. I mean, that's a secondary problem.
Do you think it's worth thinking about implementing paging on REST APIs as well?
It'd be all the same mechanics, right?
I guess so.
If you're going to implement paging, whether you want to do it via CLI, REST, it would be the same underlying API call that you're making, and then it's just a question of how you decide how much of it you want to consume.
I would think the other key would be to add filters to all the APIs, right? So
Yeah.
You again, you're trying to isolate the thing you really want to see in those first 10 lines, so you never actually have to get to the second one for the most part.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, because right now we do that in the presentation, in the CLI command, right? But we could, like David said, make that part of the API, so you just get returned what you actually care about.
Yeah, we have to. Yeah, we would have to, but that wouldn't extend an API or
Yeah,
services
like,
with
yeah.
a filter,
Yeah.
some sort of a hopefully reasonably generic filter.
Maybe you have a query object that you can populate, and then that gets passed to the API as an optional parameter.
Fields and match. At least a simple one. But I think but I think that could come again later, right? And we could potentially initially, without having to change the Java APIs, we could then come up with some sort of a base command. Let's say we want to address the CLI first, right? Then come up with some sort of a paging command that could be used as a basis for all of the larger ones of data. And come up with some reasonable page size so that, the usage model wouldn't necessarily change for the existing commands like devices, links, posts, flows. That sort of behavior would only kick in unless you give it, unless it's iterating over something of a certain size. Then we could do the same thing for UI.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
API.
the thing though is that we basically do there does need to be some API change, right? From an implementation perspective, it could just be an iterator backed by a list.
But they are iterable already. A lot of the things are iterable. I get flows.
Yeah, yes, yeah, they're iterable. They're just you just get lists back instead, right?
So again, it's a.
But that's an implementation, not
It's
an
an
API.
implementation, exactly. So I'm worried about more on the consumption side, what we do, because that's where a lot of the.
Because today, yeah, we just basically for each.
Right. And so I want to get away from using the for each and get it into some sort of paging buffer. That was my thought. Now I know how to do that or I can imagine how to do it easily on a UI side. It requires some client-side changes and some changes on the server side on message handlers. That's within our control. What I was a little bit unclear is how to use the command mechanism to do that. But if you can, if it's indeed true that we can use standard in, kind of in an interactive fashion, which I guess seems like it should be possible. It's just an SSH, like you said. Then we might be able to implement some using that approach.
Yeah, we may even be able to find like something.
So if you have access to the full STD out, can you do things like rewrite the terminal area?
I mean, you can ask for the console, and so yeah, I mean theoretically you could probably rewrite the terminal area like Les does.
Okay, would be very nice.
Yeah, probably ought to also support flag where you in non-interactive mode where if you ask for everything you can ask for everything anyway. No paging, right? If you want to.
But yeah, I mean you can effectively get the console. I mean, yeah, to rewrite the whole thing, you'd have to have an understanding of the width and the number of lines, but maybe someone's written a carafe command like this already.
Yeah.
I mean, you can pipe to less, right?
Mm-hmm.
So less is a carafe command that's built in that knows how to do the rewriting. So we can look at the code.
I'm not sure whether actually. Yeah, I don't know honestly if it.
When you pipe to less within the command, it's being parsed and it's a default carafe command, not the standard bash thing that's getting invoked. So we can take a look at how they do that, and maybe we can extend that.
But I think this is something that we'll have to do even for this release and for 1.12, because that's what's being deployed by Comcast in these enhancements in Comcast. Because if somebody does flows in a Comcast deployments, right now the control will grind to a halt. with millions of flows in the system. Really something to be avoided.
Details.
So which is why I'm interested in doing something that is reasonably isolated to the CLI and the GUI rather than imposing changes to the API. I think the API changes can come in later, additional filters or potentially changing the implementation of how the iterator maintains state. That's something that can be done later. Further optimize it or make it more adherent to your expectations. Does it sound reasonable, Charles, or do you think we're missing something?
I wonder right now, I guess the problem originates from the segment routing and the work with service providers that have large networks. I wonder if it's for Charles and you guys, it's more of a problem of consumption, like reading those flows on the terminal, or it's more of a performance issue of actually creating ONOS?
I think it's more like, how do you filter the information you really need? So having a paging probably won't help a lot. I would say I would rather have a filtering mechanism to see what I really need to see.
But that means changes to the API. So yeah. Oh, and on two different fronts, right? Both on the service side as well as on the store side, because
yeah, for example, if I wanted to like one particular flow that match on a subnet in 1,000 or maybe hundreds of thousands of flows, what I do is that I do flows -s and then I grab for that thing, right? But when I do grab, as you mentioned, that's already a client side thing. And the rest of the information, which I don't really care about, don't have to be propagated from the server side to the client side, right? So I don't know. I don't have a very solid idea right now. I'm just thinking, what some kind of filtering.
Why not? Sorry, I mean, like if it's both the client side and server side, you can handle I don't know, like 1 million flows. I mean, have you encountered like a performance issue or not? Because if it's just a matter of filtering, why can't you just pipe it to less and use the search function there with regex? I mean, changing the API in the sense adding a filtering function like that seems a lot of work in API, right?
Maybe that's true, but we just haven't evaluated that yet. So I don't have an answer if that's good enough for our scale or not. But clearly for UI, it's probably. We probably need some kind of filtering mechanism over there because we clearly don't want to display everything in a network. Like you have 1,000 hosts, and then just meaningless to show all of them together.
Oh, so I guess there's a couple of things going on here, right? So there's the performance and potentially the impact on the system when you ask for.
Performance is one thing, but the other thing is that how operator can possibly consume this information in an efficient way, right? I mean, sure that all the hosts.
Right. Well, then there's the efficient way of finding what it is that you're looking for, which is the filtering mechanism, right? But I'm also kind of worrying about kind of the safety aspect of it. So assuming you have 3 million flows in the system, and you just absent-mindedly type flows in the CLI.
It gets a little harder with the UI too, because typically you're going to show the UI before they have a chance to enter a filter, right?
Exactly.
So you'd have to do the initial query of all 3 million, and then they could type a filter to get it down.
Well,
you need some way of paging the first section in.
Right, which is why I just want to make sure that by accidentally typing a command, which is perfectly harmless to execute when you have 3,000 flows. Yeah, it's gonna give you a little bit of a visual barrage scrolling on a terminal, but you're gonna after a few seconds things will settle down and you'll be fine. But trying to do that with something that has hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, I agree. That's some level of protection, but to be more useful, I would say maybe on top of that, adding some filtering mechanism.
Yeah, I do not at all dispute the value of the filter, right? That definitely see that it would be extremely useful. I mean, in other areas, right? You can just be able to just provide a search capability. In general, across potentially multiple different subsystems. But my primary concern is right now kind of the protection and also the ability to digest the information in a more consistent way.
The ultimate goal is that we don't have to look at this information at all. We should have a diagnostic tool that tells us where which part goes wrong. So we don't have to look at this at all.
Maybe what we ought to do is then just at least put some protection in the commands that they will not execute unless you give it some sort of a flag beyond certain number of entries, right? Second thing would be to actually provide paging for this information. And then third thing would be to provide some filtering capabilities on the filtering on the inside.
Which kind of keys do you actually use to filter plurals?
Well, it depends. There are different kinds of flows. Most, well, from in our environment, the type of flow that's it's usually with the largest number of flows, usually the routing table entry, which is usually filtered by destination IP.
Yeah, so for some of these things, we could provide, some fairly simple filter options. You have some heuristics, but for things like flows, I'm not sure because those tend to be fairly structured, fairly deep structure objects, right? Where you have a flow as a treatment and a
and flow goes to the group
selector, and then exactly, and then you have to drill into these things and they can take different shape, right? Because you may be filtering for Ethernet type flows or IP flows.
I mean, if you guys are thinking of a way of filtering plurals using protocol dependent, construct,
exactly, right?
Like a big mess, especially with
exactly, right? Which is why I'm concerned about it. Which is, I would rather be, if anything, if the filtering mechanism should be reasonably kind of generic and hopefully rely on some sort of reflection to be able to.
Yeah, like a two-string version of the plural, for example, right? And you do full text search, something like that.
Yeah. But it would still do the work, but it would just do it locally on the server before sending everything across the. And if that's the case, then clearly all of the different adapters, REST API, CLI, UI, will be able to take advantage of the same.
You would do it on the server in the store, because at that point you've already returned everything from Atomics, right? If it's a consistent provision.
I think you're gonna have to get it from Atomics anyway to be able to get a comprehensive collection. But yeah, I would imagine it would be in the store. But I think in the store, not inside Atomics. Atomics would still be primitives.
But you're still talking about like potentially shipping that data across multiple instances, right? So,
yes, it would. I think that's unavoidable.
And all you've saved is you're not shipping it across one API call, so the client is actually local, right? The client at CLI is local from the store where you're requesting the state.
Yeah, I think the point John is trying to get to is that when we try to read from an Atomics class distributed primitive, we should be able to also give this filter such that this read operation will return everything.
Yeah, so there's a problem with that, which is that most data stored in Atomics is stored in binary format, so you can't use my filters.
Yeah, which is why I said it has to be on the outside.
Yeah, so it has to stream data back to a client, and pretty much all the types that are not byte arrays and strings are defined by clients, so they have to do filtering there.
Google and others generally deal with it by indexing it up front, but when it's still in its native format, and then remembering the indices, right, and searching just the indices. But I don't think that's something that we want to do here.
Another thing to remember is often these query paging APIs also allow you to get the count when you do the initial query/filter. so that while you can show the first page, the user has some feedback to how many pages there are.
I understand, but I'm just trying to. I'm trying to be careful so that we don't reinvent the wheel here, right? I'm trying to provide as simple and as cheap solution as possible for this part of your problem.
No, I agree. We don't reinvent the wheel, but I'm just saying in terms of what functionality people expect, particularly in a GUI, they're going to expect this is page 1 of N, right?
So on a UI where they have basically right now would be a continuous scrolling anyway. So I don't think we have an obligation to do it there.
Well, I don't know. Scroll bar size usually tells you how much you've got left then. Just visual clues back, particularly at the UI.
Look at the Google image search variable.
Yeah.
It's a continuous scroll, effectively.
Okay.
I mean, I know what you mean, but I'm just saying, there's precedent where we can push some of this stuff to keep things.
Yeah, it seems like maybe for like the plural store, we could think about implementing some course indexes like by device ID or by table.
So we already have ability to do it by device ID and table. It's just that that's not good enough.
We do to actually only fetch the data from that particular device.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah.
You can.
I know you can in the CLI, but I thought that was just
on the CLI.
I thought that was filtered.
No, we have it on a store and stuff like that too. I don't know about REST API, but I think for REST API.
Well, for a Floral store, you can query by device ID. That's as low as you can go.
Yeah, I forget where the command is, but I'm not sure for everybody. But I'm pretty confident that we allow already segmenting and by these rough categories. But I think even then, I think with some of the edge deployments, we can be talking about thousands of flows per 100,000 flows per single table, and that's still too big. So yeah, we'll have to probably plan that work as part of the old release, but then backport it into the 13 and 12 potentially as well. So I'm trying to keep it as contained as possible, at least initially, and then add the bells and whistles maybe later. And yes, as Charles said, ideally nobody should be looking at this information. Yeah. Then we have to figure out somebody.
You mean no human should be looking at it? Or?
Yeah, no human.
I mean, but it might still be useful for like if Second Round needs to query flows or something like that, then it might be useful.
Yeah, that's
so I think even programmatically the filters would come handy for sure, because that way you can sort of get the filtering done on the back end. Then
have a similar user to query with that.
I think I mean doing it on the sort of store and service side would definitely benefit other things, many things at once, but that's a little bit more involved.
I guess the T3 tool that does create the plural store.
Yes.
And it can become problematic because you create the plural store for all the devices and the network.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The thing is that ideally that tool should create the store with some kind of
more targeted
area. Yeah.
How?
By this filtering API you're talking, right? Right now there is no way.
Yeah.
So yeah, but what I'm saying is that an operator or a developer should look at the result of T3.
Yeah,
T3 should look at all the floating groups.
Yeah, it's impossible to debug by just
in that case, there is no way for a human to debug the problem.
Just as a thought from the CLI perspective, today often people will, well, I don't know about people, I can speak for myself. You pipe the output through a grep and then through less or something like that, or multiple greps. Once we modify the CLI for paging, and I understand there's filtering in there, how's that going to be handled when we also are then piping that output through grep?
Also, the thought was that for interactive, non-interactive sessions, they would basically either we would automatically detect non-interactive session and then not do the paging, which means you can just pipe it as you would.
Okay.
Or if you can't detect it automatically, add a flag where basically to suppress the paging.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely would like to make sure there's a way to continue easily scripting this stuff.
Okay.
You know, it may not be efficient, but still.
And it might be some combination, like give me the first 100 entries, but don't page them, type of thing, right?
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Right. And again, that would probably be some of the options that would be supported in common by the paging command, right?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So if there's no other discussion points here, I think next would be probably trying to figure out who's going to do this and how to frame this. Something to be done probably as we plan the whole release. All right. Any other topics for discussion? If not, I guess we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks.